a list of questions, and I'm going to try to
So I'll
get
try to
through
keep
them.
the answers
Yeah.
somewhat brief.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. So the first question I have is, given the deficit and the increasingly incendiary rhetoric that you are no doubt hearing, do you worry that Republicans, if they win the presidency and even perhaps the Senate, would try to shutter the EPA?
Well, we hear all kinds of rhetoric. I think, the truth is, on the ground, outside the Beltway, the American people strongly support setting reasonable, strong standards to protect their health. The American people support clean air and clean water, no surprise. They understand that taking the environmental cop off the beat, leaving industry to police itself, is not likely to result in more protection for their families. So I think what I say in response to that is that there really is no need in this day and age for us to have that old argument about the economy versus the environment. Conferences like this with series are really all about the idea that we've innovated beyond that, and we just have to have people see it differently. We can have both.
But do you worry, given their rhetoric, given the three things that Rick Perry couldn't remember, one of them might be the EPA. I mean, do you worry that given what's on the table here, that that's a really viable possibility?
Listen, politics are sort of separate from my job. I was appointed by this president to carry out a suite of environmental laws, like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, our nation's waste laws, that are very important. They really are some of the strongest laws in the world. They're looked at by other countries. So there's always, in a political year, lots of rhetoric that goes back and forth. I don't worry about that. I worry about making sure that we're speaking to the American people and explaining to them why, as we do our job, we're not unmindful of the importance of making sure we grow our economy at the same time.
Okay. In an interview this week with Rolling Stone magazine, the president was quoted as saying, "There's no doubt that we have a lot more work to do on climate change." He added that over the next 6 months, he would, quote, "be very clear in voicing my belief that we're going to have to take further steps to deal with climate change in a serious way." What does that mean?
It's the president's words. I'm not going to speak for him.
But what's on the...
I haven't read the whole article, and I don't tell my boss that yet, but I am looking forward to it. Listen, this administration hasn't backed away from the need to address climate change, carbon pollution, and other forms of pollution, even as we've been growing our economy and trying to add jobs back in. So that means things like recognizing early on in this administration that there was a real opportunity in making our cars and trucks more efficient. It's now contributed to us being able to really lower our dependence on foreign oil supplies. And that's incredibly important for the security of our country as well as for our climate. We're going to cut billions of tons of carbon pollution. We just finalized rules for oil and gas production that, in addition to making our air much healthier and cutting down on smog pollution, are going to save the emission of millions of pounds of methane gas. Methane's a greenhouse gas in addition to being a fuel. So we don't want that in our skies because it's actually almost 20 times more polluting than carbon when it comes to greenhouse.
I want to ask you a little bit about that. But is there anything specific on the agenda that you can cite that in the next 6 months that you might be...
Well, we just proposed standards for new power plants. They're new source performance standards. They're standards that say how much carbon pollution a new power plant in this country can emit. And they're based on a significant reduction in greenhouse gas that we get by looking at the opportunities around either treating carbon pollution through carbon capture and sequestration or the advantage that natural gas has. So those have to be reviewed and finalized, as well as finalizing the final round of car rules all the way out through the year 2025.
Okay. This is an issue that I come across often because I write about climate change to a good degree. What do you tell people who insist that climate change is a hoax, that it's a conspiracy to raise their taxes? How do you persuade them that the science is credible and that there's likely to be expensive, harmful consequences without serious action?
Well, two things. First, I always tell them that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of scientists here in this country, internationally, who review the science and who are experts in the field, have come to the consensus view that our climate is changing, and that one of the primary reasons for that is the emission of greenhouse gases. We've changed the carbon balance on our planet. It's not the natural carbon balance because we burn fossil fuels and emit so much CO2. That's the first thing I say. You have to, there will always be outliers, but it's an overwhelming majority of people, of experts in the field. The second thing I like to say is people always ask me, well, the weather is really extreme this season or last season, this year or last year. The weather in any given month or day is the weather. But when over periods of time you see more and more extremes closer and closer together, it's an indication of what we're facing in the future in terms of our ability to adapt to extremes over and over. Really warm winters or really wet springs. Our economy pays each time that happens. And if you can imagine our grandchildren having to face those extremes on an almost monthly or annual basis, a 500-year flood becoming a 10-year flood or a 5-year flood, that's the enormity of the challenge we face. And as somebody said, I think it was Senator Alexander from Tennessee, if someone told me there was a chance of my house burning down that was as high as the chance that that's what our future would be, we should take out some insurance. And the idea of insurance is to start to lower our emissions and look at ways to adapt to climate change to make our communities more resilient.
Okay. With the rise of fracking, there are all kinds, you addressed this to some extent at the end. Does the value of replacing coal with natural gas from fracking outweigh the environmental damage from fracking in terms of contamination of water supplies and other environmental issues? And are we moving too far in the direction of expanding natural gas, given that it still produces substantial amounts of greenhouse gases, rather than focusing more perhaps on renewable energy?
Natural gas is an opportunity for our country. The President has said it's an important opportunity for our country. It does more than just address carbon pollution, but it does address carbon pollution. And the key there is it has to be done safely and responsibly. If you waste natural gas into the atmosphere, it can be much more greenhouse gas intensive than CO2. So that's not a good idea. But if you can find a way to do it where you're not polluting our water supplies, where you're managing the carbon pollution, and where you're assuring that